Vikki, welcome back to the compound. Thank you. I feel like you could help interior decorate this place. So you've been here. You've been here before the gallery. You've been here when I think I just like started doing the DraftKings stuff in here. So what do you think when you come in this compound place? Like, what's the feeling, especially you being a creative, what does it give you?
It gives me Andy Warhol factory vibes.
That was what...
Even though we were both too young to be part of something like that. But it's evocative of like a New York creatives hanging out. People do music, people who do art, people who write, but somehow it all makes sense and they feed off each other's creative energy, and ideas come out of that. So I've been thinking, where is that in New York?
Wow.
Recent years, and it just reminds me Andy Warhol factory.
That was what made me want to come up with the concept of doing it. And I think theirs was called the Fun Factory. It was a couple different names, but I did want to kind of mimic that in my own world, especially when I look at like creatives. I used to say like creatives is kind of get separated like racism because they put photographers over here, the studio was all the way over there, the editors and marketing department. That was like, why couldn't it be a place where everybody could come and just be together and create?
Yeah. I mean, that's when great things happen. And it used to be like that. I always say like hip hop was like a startup and, great things kind of just came out of everyone hanging out.
So, well, you have to come back and hang out more. So here at this Compound Conversations, I don't want to talk about just the moment of like what you're doing the latest. It's all about the journey, your story, especially with you being a woman. It's great to inspire young women out there and just all humans. But, a lot of women don't get to tell their stories as much as men get to tell their stories. So I want to go way back to the beginning and then kind of to now. And let's just go through your journey. And starting that, how did it start? What was the family? Is it mom? Is it dad? Is there sisters? I know it was out of America, but where did life all start for you at?
Yeah, I mean, I love taking it so far back because it's so informative of who we are, right?
Totally.
I mean, I was born in Kazakhstan, which is the former Soviet Union, and my family came over here as refugees when I was 5.
Wow.
So English is not my first language, which, as a writer, I'm always...
You're doing great now.
That's always my excuse when my editor is like, what's that? I'm like, English is not my first language. No. But we, of all places, were placed, with refugees. They like kind of place you in, places where they think you can get work. And my dad was an electrical engineer back in the Soviet Union, and they thought he could get work in the auto industry in Detroit. So we moved to Detroit of the
from the D.
The D.
Wow.
The D of the 1980s.
Wow, the real D.
So if everyone's always like, was it really like that? BMF? Is it like BMF? And you're like, yeah, it was.
It was.
But I feel so lucky in a way that's of all the cities, that's where we landed, because Detroit, for anyone that knows, it's, Motor City, former murder capital, but everything that they do there is really rooted in music.
Mm-hmm, totally.
And that's how, and Black culture.
Of course.
And so to me, everything I learned about what America was
through Detroit.
We had, Electrifying Mojo was like a really significant early DJ there. All the great like techno and house music
totally.
Heads like kind of started with him. And so, even at a young age, like that was what you plugged into, and so Detroit was really foundational, I think, in who I was, because I didn't really know, like my family didn't know anything about what American pop culture was. I remember even like, I didn't know what Star Wars was, all that kind of stuff. We didn't eat American food. And so like everything was through Detroit. So I have that was my, early.
That was your college course.
That was my college course. Yeah.
So, question: growing up, coming from Russia, but was it you the only one that took to the culture, or did your parents? Did your father come from Russia and was like, okay, Marvin Gaye? Did they adapt to the culture, or was you like the little girl in the corner? Like,
no, they were like already older.
Okay.
I mean, they, my dad worked ended up, the auto industry was crashed out in the 80s. So that didn't work out. He just ended up working odd jobs. We were on public assistance, like Section 8 housing, AFDC, all the programs, and that too really, shaped who I was, understanding just, American politics and
corruption.
The struggle and corruption and all of that. So my parents were kind of too old. They were just kind of trying to make their way. But, me as a young one and, teenager was already in the Detroit clubs, like hearing the music and already like being pulled by New York too.
Okay, so to me, you're like some sorts of like, I look at myself through you because you study culture. Like, first of all, you're a trusted voice in journalism. But I think it goes way beyond journalism. And I have this theory that I look at, like when I look at hip hop, it's 4 cultures in one, right? So I look at art is what it's supposed to be called, but it's called graffiti. Breakdancing should have been called dancing. And then you have MCing and you have DJing. And when I look at you, it seemed like you have all these pillars of culture. When fast forward to a lot of your recent works, one of your books is jewelry, one of your books is photography, hip hop, and but it's like when you was growing up, what lanes gravitated to you, or was it just this compounding of cultures? Like, oh, I like the music. Oh, wait, I love journalism. Oh, you know what? I love film. Because most people, even for me, when it all started, it was just DJing.
Yeah.
I didn't know nothing about marketing. I didn't know, I didn't learn all these lanes. But coming from Detroit, it is it's probably like the 8th borough of New York. You got like Philly, New York, Chicago. But Detroit, I do consider it has so much culture there. But so growing up, what attracted you and what lanes were attracted you?
I think there's all parts of it, because you can't, like they always say, you can't take the best of a culture and leave the rest. So to me, it was always all of it. But, if I really kind of dig deep, I think the visuals of it, and I think that may be related to the fact of not speaking the language necessarily early on.
Yep.
Like, everything was like what it looked like,
Okay.
Or how people moved or what they wore, or, turning on, like we had this TV show in Detroit, it was called The Scene, and it was almost like an after school, like dance party, but they played all the best, like early techno and Cybotron and all of that. And so, early on, I couldn't really understand a lot of what was being said.
Yeah.
That's really early. I did learn English pretty early, by 7 I was good. But I think the visual probably stayed with me, and I think that's why to this day, everything is rooted in like photography, the visuals, what people choose to wear and things like that. Like I always found that interesting, and how that was used to kind of communicate and move through the world.
Okay, so now I'm gonna paint the picture through like my lens to see how it aligns with you. I was born in New York in the Bronx, and I moved to Philly. And I was going back and forth between Philly and Queens, and in Laurelton, Queens to be exact. And then on the block I grew up was a bunch of kids and just music, and a couple of my best friends knew like rappers and DJs, and I was like, wow, this is exactly what I wanted to do. And being able to go to the park and seeing like the DJs of Philly DJing and back in New York. And I started DJing. I got my first set of turntables at like 12, but just to play music. And then I started DJing at 13, which I was in 9th grade. But that was kind of, when I was 7 years old, I was like, I'm something different about me. I know I'm special. And I'm like, just with the world of how I played with my toys and how I looked at music and everything. But then 13 was when, I started DJing. When little Vikki growing up in Detroit, she's probably in the clubs too young, but she was in there. It's okay. She was studying the culture through a visual aspect, like you said. But when did that notion go off, like, okay, this is the world I want to be a part of? And what was that moment for you?
I guess for me, it was always being part of like subcultures was always the pull. Okay. Even in Detroit, I knew like the club world or these like other kids. Sometimes, they were like punk rock kids or skateboard kids or techno kids. Like there was that world, in Detroit that was sort of separate from the mainstream world. And it was kind of a bunch of, I guess, misfits or, whatever you want to call it. But that felt like a family away from family. And, the clubs, which I was in way too early in Detroit, we had even like the Detroit version of like Paradise Garage, which would be Club Heaven. The Detroit Sound Conservancy just like conserved the Club Heaven sound system. But that was a big like, gay dance house club that was really important in Detroit. You had all the early DJs, Derek May, doing like little, like pretty much like kind of here, like just kind of parties, sort of loft parties and things like that. And that's just always where I felt at home.
Wow.
And I always say like club culture during that time, it was almost like the early internet because you knew that there was similar kind of energies happening in your city, but there was something similar happening in London, right? With like Soul to Soul and the Africa Center.
Yep, totally.
There was, of course, what was happening in New York.
Yep.
I used to get like early issues of like paper magazines sent through the mail and pour through that. That was like my, in high school. And so I always just felt like whatever was happening in these subcultures, where the graffiti artists were, where the DJs were, like that's where something important was happening.
And where you wanted to be at.
And where I wanted to be, yeah.
Okay, so now Vikki's grown. She's almost probably old enough to be in the clubs, but it seems like everybody I do talk to, and just in life, and especially in our culture, New York pulls them. It starts pulling them when they're growing up, Speak to my friends in Oakland and Atlanta. Everybody gets like, they need to get to New York. So you're getting paper magazines. Now you're hearing the music with all these artists that's from New York. When did this thought going like, start happening like, I got to get to New York?
It was always the plan, but of course you have to figure out how. I ended up doing like 1 year of college in Detroit. This was also when the Pistons were great, back to back. I just have to throw that in, by the way.
What was that, 2003?
No, so 04 is when they won the 04 championship, but I'm talking about the 89-90.
Oh, you're talking about the real bad boys.
I'm talking about the real bad boys.
Well, you was a bad girl back then,
Listen, I mean, I was on that celebratory parade down Woodward, like greatest time. But New York, I'm trying to even remember like the specifics of it all, right? Because you just come to New York, you figure it out. I remember one of the first things I did was I've never like shared this with anyone, but I wrote a postcard because there was no, this was all like pre-email. So I wrote a letter to the managing editor at Paper Magazine.
Wow.
Like on a postcard. There was like a kind of an artsy bookstore called Book Beat next to where I lived in Detroit. And I found this like really cool postcard with like it was like very photography, what I thought they thought would be cool. And I was like, hey, I want to come and intern for you guys. Wow. And sent it away. A couple months later, I got a call and they were like, come on.
Wow.
So that coupled with, so I did that. I came to Paper Magazine as an intern. And through a friend there, also got a night job at a place called Nell's.
Okay.
Which was a really important
staple in New York.
Staple for New York clubs.
Culture,
it's
everything.
Where Biggie shot his Big Papa video. Yep. It's where all the industry
DJs
used to come. Prince used to come and pull up and perform there. Like it was, and for DJs too. Stretch Armstrong, Clark Kent, like everyone.
Bobbito, everybody.
Bobbito. That was the place. So I ended up getting a job at Nell's and then interning at Paper. And just through that unlock, started meeting, so many people. And Patrick Moxie, who ran first a club called Payday, and then started a label called Payday Records Empire Management. I met him through Nell's, and, they were like, we need a person, I don't even know if it was like a job.
It was in the title.
It was just like come and do, like we just need sometimes we need the phone answered, sometimes we need you to take Gangstar on tour. Like it's gonna vary.
Every job I think in the 90s,
right.
So that was the same scenario that happened with me and N1.
Yeah.
It was 96 and they was like, yo, we just need somebody to teach us and be around and do, you might have to go get lunch, but you might be at a commercial. And I was just like, what am I called? They was like, we'll get back to you.
Yeah.
No title yet.
Yeah. So, so then, while doing all of that, I went to go work at Payday Empire. After a couple weeks, they were like, what do you want your job title to be? Because we're making business cards.
Okay.
And I said, how about director of marketing?
Oh, you went right. We went.
I mean, I should have aimed higher. I should have been like, how about
marketing assistant, or you just went straight to this.
No,
I like that though.
Well, there was only like 5 of us there, and 2 of them were the founders of the company.
And haters wasn't probably invented yet. It was probably no haters.
No. So I was like, let's just go with director of marketing, and they're like, bet. They're like, will you still answer the phone if it rings? I'm like, yes, I will. So it was great, and I say it was like very much like a startup. There was 5 of us there, but we had like the hottest groups of the time, Gangstar, the whole like
Group Home was on there too.
Group Home was on there. Show and AG.
She was on there. Yeah, y'all had the records.
All the great, Bobby Condors as like a D, and so there was J-Ru, like just
the Jamager, yep.
Yeah, like just hits upon hits, and then anyone that Primo was producing was like automatically family, and then D&D Studios was like our second office, and anyone that kind of came through there. And, and at the time too, like hip hop, and this with N1, it was also so connected to the club world and like streets, teams and
playgrounds and everything.
N1, right? Like all that was all connected.
Yep, totally. Wow.
So that's sort of, where you, again, like it just felt like an extended family, which was what I was looking for. And at the time, there was also a lot of hip hop magazines that were starting up. Like at Empire, we had we started in the Lower East Side, but then we moved to 588 Broadway.
Okay.
And right next to us was The Source, like right next door, 584, I think they were. And then right up the street was Raucous.
Yeah, Raucous was on Broadway, right next to Acme. What was that little?
Yeah,
I forgot.
It was like in the that little cut. 600.
Yeah, 600 right off Broadway. Yep.
And then, and Paper Magazine was just a couple blocks down on Broadway.
Was you still at Paper too?
So at this point, I was their DJ editor and their nightlife editor, but freelance.
Okay.
Yes.
Kept the check coming.
So many jobs. So many jobs.
Paper, Payday, and the club, all the same time. Now, for me, I remember I was DJing, producing, engineer, but this entrepreneurial spirit kicked in. So you, of course, you have 3 jobs, but when did this? Because for me, like seeing people like you and knowing your journey from afar, but I always try to figure out when did these like light bulbs, when did these moments go off? And it seemed like you was doing all three of these things, but in doing all this, did it ever kick in like, I know what I want to do, and because you're an entrepreneur to me, like when did the inkling of like you really know what you want to do, even though you had these jobs? I didn't feel that was it then.
Yeah, well, so a lot of what I was doing at Payday, Empire, and also at Paper, like I was dealing a lot with photography and the visuals and like shoots and things like that. But I was saying before how there was a lot like The Source and Paper, they were like right in the proximity of where we were. And at the time, a lot of young hip hop magazines were starting out. So I was already doing some writing at Paper. I was writing their DJ column. I wrote their nightlife column, and then I was starting to interview artists and things like that. And so when a lot of these early hip hop magazines started popping up, things like, Rap Pages out of the West Coast, even Vibe, Word Up. I never wrote for Word Up, but like all these other ones, and also like Beat Down Magazine and Ego Trip,
Was Feds out around then?
I don't know. That wasn't in my purview, but hey, I probably would have written for them had they asked.
You probably gave them the sauce.
But very quickly, the writing, the freelance writing was something I really fell in love with, because it was a way that you could sit and talk to people, being able to like interview someone, especially when they're like in the midst of putting out like
music,
a first record, the music, all of that. That was something that I really was like, oh, this is special. I was Tupac's first interview, if not first, like first 5 interviews. And I interviewed him when he was just having his first album out. For a small magazine. It was a newspaper actually called Beat Down, which was started by Sasha Jenkins, rest in peace, and Haji Akibade. And they were starting this newspaper out of Queens, and they were like, how about you go interview Tupac? And so a lot of those early artists that are now such icons everyone was just beginning, right? Everyone was like just kids, just starting, still really raw. Like we were all really raw. Even like my writing was really, I look back at some of my old writing and it's like, it's so bad that it's good. It's like, it's just so like literally how you think. You're just putting it down on paper.
But it's always the best though. It's like everybody's first album. It can never be duplicated, but it's like so many imperfections that's perfect.
Yeah. Yep. So that's just, that's like what I really fell in love with. And all those early writers and editors, that was like a generational thing. And we worked really closely with photographers. So like anytime I'd go out on an interview, you'd have a photographer there with you. Anytime, I was with Gangstar and they were doing their interviews, it was always with photographers and, visualists. So that's and so that was sort of the path that I went further down was, the writing and journalism. That's what I loved. And, having started out sort of not knowing how the communication on a page really worked, like that felt really creative to me. That felt like you were making something.
So it's funny because a lot of guys that I interview and talk to, we grew up and we were such comic book nerds. And like, I remember like growing up, it was like X-Men books that was thick. The Marvel started making hardback comics that like today when I look at me and my love for books and like Taschen is almost like my Marvel when I was growing up because they had the biggest boxes and the clamshell and the pages was bigger than just your 8.5 by 12. So now going into like, because to me, you were always been a curator by doing all these things, from writing to looking at photography. Now you even when you putting these things in magazines, it's like, okay, I want the words laid out here, I want the pictures laid out here. Was it a love for you with books growing up? You know, because some people are writing, but they like as just like a journalism thing. But was it looking at books and was that something you growing up like? Did you love layouts? Did you love textures and the feels and be like, hey, oh, this book got leather on the side? Like, was that something?
So, yeah. So, well, first of all, my mom was a librarian.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So I grew up in libraries and
it's making
just
sense now.
fell in love with books. I mean, that wasn't like a conscious thing of why, but now I'm like, oh, it
makes sense.
It makes sense. And so she was like, I just fell in love with books from an early age, but never, didn't really see like a coffee table style book or a photography book until very randomly. So I grew up in Northgate Apartments in Oak Park, Michigan, which, people from around there will know. And there wasn't a lot of like high art things in that neighborhood, like Northgate Apartments. Right? Don't they say like any apartments that end in gate are bad news? It's
bad
like,
news.
yeah.
And they don't even have a gate.
Right. But there was this bookstore within walking distance of my apartment complex that's still there to this day called Book Beat. And so I, would walk over there, and they had the craziest selection of books for like a Detroit bookstore. Mm-hmm. They had like Robert Mapplethorpe and Nan Golden and all of these like early big art books, all these Japanese photography books. And this is like back in the day. And for so many years, I was like, why are these books in here? Because they really like opened me up to the world of like Taschen, but I didn't really understand what they were or why they were like in this bookstore. Gotcha. Years later, I actually found out that the owner of that bookstore was, forgetting his name, but he was in a punk band called Destroy All Monsters with the artist Mike Kelly, because Mike Kelly is from Michigan. And so this guy owned the bookstore. He was in this band with Mike Kelly, and they were very plugged into like subculture world. And it happened to be right by my house. And so I would go there as a teenager and be like, I don't know what I'm looking at, but this is amazing. And later it would all kind of come together. But even, even as like a young writer, like books are the dream, right?
Yeah,
it's like,
totally.
It's like this kind of weird, almost like gatekeepery thing that like even writers are like, how do I get a book published? Like it's a very, kind of traditional world. Yeah.
It's tough.
It's tough. Yeah. And I often, like a lot of, writers that ask me for advice, like I always give the analogy of a book deal. Like I'm like, you have to send a demo, totally. You have to send your book, book proposal. You have to have a distribution. I feel like it's very similar to getting a record deal.
I mean, I just see how many people use, it's like getting a comic book. I talk to a lot of people who could draw, and I'm like, it's not an easy process.
Yeah.
So, okay, wow. Now it's all coming together, even for me now. So, little Vikki grew up around books, unconsciously knowing this is her life path. Then the club girl who was seeing all the cultures comes to New York, the music, writing for a company called Paper. Of course, now you're selling paper. So it's all making sense. And then looking at you is actually connecting to the first title of your book. When you speak on this journey, you speak about writing, you speak about photography. You look like a beautiful high. When was the journey now telling you like, okay, I've been writing, I've been doing these interviews, I want my own body of work? Like, did that come while you were still at all these places later, or did that come later? But because we all get to that point where it's like, okay, I'm giving all these people, these brands, these artists, but I want to be able to curate this my own way. Like, when did that spark go off for you?
Well, there was, so, as life lifes, right? Life lifes. I became, a mom, raised kids, came to a point in my life where, I was like, what what is beyond, I had a career also, like I worked at CNN for many years, and then CBS, did sort of traditional journalism. But then, there was a moment where I was really inspired by Magnum contact sheets, which is for those who know photography, is a book that takes these kind of, Magnum is like a documentary group that does all these very iconic, photos, but more like war photography and news documentaries. And they had done a book called Magnum Contact Sheets, which took these like very iconic photos, but showed you, the contact sheets in the process. Mm-hmm. And even before I was like, thinking that I wanted to do a book, I was like, oh, I want to do that, but for hip hop. Mm. Because having been on part of all these shoots and having like, been there in person, the shot that ended up on the album cover, the shot that ended up on the magazine cover.
There's so much
and
more.
Oftentimes that's all we saw.
Forever.
But then, seeing the contact shoots, you get to see what we saw
in
being live, right, which is like, cousins, DJs, managers,
dogs,
like behind the scenes stuff that made it feel very real. So I wanted to do that for hip hop, and just thought like a book was the best format to do that in, because I could have done it as a video series or documentary or something, but that's how the book path started.
One thing for me, I live by, is a Jay-Z line that I love, and it's called "Allow me to reintroduce myself." And some people, from Contact High, you could have kept going down. It could have been Contact High Part 2, Contact High Part 3, but you find a niche in culture, and it is under the umbrella of hip hop, and then you come back now with like the next stage of your second book is a jewelry book, which has been around forever, been part of it. It's like maybe the third side chick of hip hop girlfriend, which is jewelry. From going from photography, and I like the basic Contact High was photography, but like it's still that root of photography now with jewelry. But it was time for Vikki to allow her to reintroduce herself. Like, where did the inkling and the idea, like, let's do jewelry now, but stay in my lane of showcasing this through a book, a coffee table book, writing my own style, in a curated way the way you do it. But it is something about your books where now hearing you say it, because you look at a book and you don't think about, you look at the book as the whole package. You look at it as like, the trim of the book, the font size, the photography. But now hearing your story and looking at your books, it is like, wow, all these books are beautiful photography. But the concepts that you pick, that you're doing, is what also makes them so special. So where did this jewelry thing come? How did it birth?
Yeah, I think it all goes back to the thing that I love, which is like the visuals of the culture and how people communicate through those visuals. So I had always, been clocking like what people wear, how they wear it, where they get it from. Even in Detroit, we had our little local jewelry stores. My mom got me this little piece from a local jewelry store in Detroit in the 80s. But I wish I could say, and I'm just going to be transparent, because I think the Ice Cold book was not as like laser focused planned on my part. The idea had sort of been talked to, with through a friend who's passed away now, Sasha Jenkins, has sort of planted the seed in my mind as a book concept. And I was actually meeting with Tashin to pitch them a whole different book. Again, I wish I could say, that was the plan, but as all creative things, they, so I was actually pitching this other book to them, and they're like, well, what else is on your mind? And I was like, oh, I'm also kind of ideating this hip hop jewelry book. And the editor who I was meeting with, Rule Golden, was like, we'll do it. That's it.
Wow.
Like, he's like, forget about your other idea. Like, this is the one. And so I was like, oh, okay. Like, and then it was off and running. So sometimes, I always say, like, there needs to be such a space for creatives to not be so decided, to kind of have that moment where you're like, maybe thinking it's that one way, you want it one way, but it's another, to quote The Wire. But just to have that moment of like play and mistakes and ideation and thinking things through, it's also something you learn when you observe studio work, right? Yeah. Like producers in the studio, right? They're like slowing down the sample, they're speeding it up. They're like, let's try this, let's wipe that slate. Like it's all a normal part of the recording process. Yep. But people never see that.
Never, ever.
Right? It's like the darkroom process. Like people see the finished product, they never see the overexposures, the underexposures, all of that. And so
always everything.
And creatives always think like they have to come with a cooked idea, or otherwise,
it's not gonna work. Yeah.
It's not a work. And so to give yourself, something I've like learned over time is kind of give yourself a little bit of that space, and you're going to land on your feet, and you're going to make something better than you thought. And so I think, so Ice Cold came about like that, where it was like, Havoc turning on the stove for the Shukwen sample, like where you're like, I think that's it. Yes, that's it. Like, and then you go, it's like that. So that book, came out so beautifully. And then of course, got so much love and, was turned into an exhibit. That's another thing, I was blessed with both Contact High and Ice Cold, is both of those books got turned into shows. And Contact High, has traveled to a bunch of museums. Ice Cold was at, American Museum of Natural History here in New York. So that curatorial hat too was really interesting, to kind of take a book in print form and kind of make it into, a real form. That was also, a stretch for me, but really, really good.
Well, that's what I mean. That to me, this person that was born in a D, it's always been there. You always been a curator of all these things. And, I always say, like, even for me, with Compound being like the name of my company and brand, it's about taking things, putting them together. But they never had an item being together on, because basketball and hip hop was together forever. But then when I met A1 and put it on a VHS tape. Yep. Now it's like, wow. But same with hip hop and jewelry. It's always been together, but you were the one that put it in the book. And I think you are great at taking cultures and blending them together and placing them in coffee table books, and also now curating shows. So let's fast forward past the book now, because I think the mind of Vikki still has so much more to do, so many more things to put together. Like, is there other cultures and other things that you want to connect with hip hop, like as you see your career progressing?
Yeah, I mean, the book I'm working on now is a book with the Lakers, which will be out next year. That's also with Tashin. And that book is really interesting because it takes a culture approach to basketball. It's not just about, we won this many championships in these years, and, this was Skyhook, this and that. Sure. And that's in there, right? That's like the foundational stuff. But what about Magic Johnson in that fur coat walking into the All-Star
Prince
game?
And Madonna and everybody. Yeah.
What about,
the Bus family?
The Bus family. What about the story of, how a city reacts to like what that Lakers, does, and that's something that's universal. I mean, I saw it, how the Pistons impact Detroit.
Wait. Hold
when
on,
I was
stop.
a kid.
There's no Pistons book going on? Like,
Call me.
Tension.
Little Caesars Arena, I'll be there. No. But, you know, and seeing even like what the Knicks just did, like to bring the city to life and all of that. So, and, you know, and to your point, like basketball and hip hop have always been super intertwined, which is intertwined with sneaker culture, which is, you know, intertwined even with jewelry. I mean, Michael Jordan and the double gold chains, you know, I wrote about that. Dr. J, like I wrote about that in Ice Cold. So to me, it's like connecting all these things that when you're in the culture, you understand. You're like, of course, it's all related, but maybe to a mainstream audience, they don't understand.
Yeah, they don't. A lot of times, a lot of people don't. I mean, that's saying we don't see what's right in front of your face.
Yeah.
Until somebody else puts it together.
Yep. So I'm really excited, you know, for that book. I think it'll be sort of a first of its kind in kind of connecting all those dots, but still very much making it a story of, you know, one of the most storied basketball teams of all time.
True. Calm down the way he's talking about the Lakers, though. It seemed a little, I don't know if it's a little fan.
Listen, you remember me at the Sixers-Knicks watch party. I was wearing a Lakers jacket.
I mean, I don't know if you were working, though. So, I have to be like this because I have a line. You should use this line. When people ask you, say I'm an NBA friendly.
See, I disagree. I feel like you have to pick a side and then switch depending. Like when it was Knicks Pistons, I was like, I'm Pistons.
But you.
And then when they got out, I was like, all right, I'm back to Knicks.
No, see, that looks. I don't even know.
Crazy.
I don't know what that looks crazy.
I know. I'm just kidding.
NBA friendly, you're good all the way across for business, conversations, and you're working. So
yeah.
Because but like once they knocked out, I go with them. It's a little wild.
Yeah.
So,
but I will just add this because, you know, we were talking about, you know, health and wellness and mental health and working with an organization like the Lakers and just kind of the sports world compared to like the hip hop world.
You don't have to say no more almost.
Well, it's taught me a lot of things sort of in how creatives, that the idea of like wanting each other to win, right?
Yeah.
And everyone, I mean, not to be too much of a, you know, pun, but like, you know, playing your position, because that's something, you know, when I think back on working at Empire, working, you know, at the magazines, a lot of what hip hop was in those early days was you get in where you fit in.
Well, it was
and you play your position.
Well, it was a battle too, though. Like, think about hip hop, right? From the start of it, is I'm better than you as an MC. I'm better than you as a DJ. And like sports, because it's funny you say this, because when I went to N1, right, I was fresh from being a DJ, just straight hip hop. Everything is, but then when I went to N1, it was like, oh, this guy's on the marketing team. His job is to help me out. And this person is doing retail, they're helping me out. When you're like in hip hop, even if you go in with like, when you go in as a writer, you're still by yourself. Everybody goes in, and then when you even get in these buildings, you still feel by yourself. This is why artists feel like sometimes, I used to always love hearing artists say this one line when I watched American Music Awards at a young age. And I never understood it. When the artists used to say, first thing they got on, they used to be like, I would like to thank the people up top. And like nobody really says that no more. Like they'll thank the people in the buildings, or they be like, I like to thank my management, but like, you know, they were helped, like, wanted to thank the fans. Yes. And like, that's why sports is like, they're put together and everybody respects each other. They help each other. And
yes.
Yeah, and then they always love, that's why you don't see rappers really going to sign autographs. I don't know if you've seen what Shay's been doing. He signed 400 and something autographs before a playoff game, and they're down like, I think they was down 2-1, and he's still going to. Now, to me, and that's no shame to musicians or entertainers, but I don't see a rapper going before the show or a musician and signing 1,000 autographs, and I feel like hip hop was just built from a contest of like a gladiator type sport, and like sports that was a team thing.
Look, which is valid. I think people now, it's not good to be competitive, you know, because you have to be like so. But competitive, like sports, is the one place where you can. It's like, yes, one person wins, another person loses.
Yep.
Like it's still clean. It's still that like, you know, that real human nature kind of thing. But you know, and the fandom thing is fascinating. One of the first things that Jeannie Buss said to me when we were talking about, you know, what they wanted in the book for Lakers, she's like, the guy sitting all the way up in the rafters, she's like, that's who I want this book to be for. That's who I want to celebrate in this book. Like, not, you know, because Lakers is so like Celebrity Row and all that. Yep. But, you know, this idea of being a fan, I always say that about hip hop. Like, it's always so, you know, the word fan has become like, oh, he's a fan, she's a fan. Yeah, like, it's an insult. Bad thing almost. Yeah. But like, I'm a fan first and foremost. And that's what I was, you know, as that kid in Detroit. Like, you have to be a fan first. You have to love the thing that you're of service to. You have to love that. And then the work follows.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm a fan of Vikki. And we're coming to the end, but I have one more question. And when you take this beautiful body of work in your journey, and if you had to do this last book, but it's about yourself, what is this book about when you want to show your work to the world of you now?
Whew. Listen, that's why I've always stuck with journalism, right? I've avoided writing about I mean, you know, it's nice here to kind of talk about the journey and where it all started, but you know, turning that pen the other way is something I've avoided my whole life. Wow. And
but it's a beautiful journey. And I think you have, you know, who better to do this book that knows about journalism, chapters, like the photography. I mean, you're very capable of doing it. And did you ever think of, like, if I had to do a book about my life and my journey, is that even in the thoughts of your progression?
Unless it's told through the story of the 89 bad boys of Detroit, that'll be my writing mechanism, as told through Bill Laimbeer. No, I've never thought about it, but you know, who knows?
Well, I got the title. It's Detroit's Bad Girl.
I like it.
It's kind of.
I like it. The title could go either way, but but it works. I see where it's coming from.
Vikki, thank you for coming back to the compound. Thank you for doing Compound Conversations, and please come back.
I will, for sure. And thank you for all you do here. It's something important for the culture, and I'm proud to be here.
Thank you. We're up. See, we hit everything.